Most people from the UK and Europe think the US system works exactly the same as theirs. 3 or 4 fixed years of studying one subject. That's not at all how the American system really works. US degrees are actually built around credits, requirements, and categories. And that's why international students end up wasting thousands of dollars and years of time. Once I understood how the structure of US college actually worked, everything started to make sense. In this video, I'm going to break down in 4 parts how US degrees are structured and what international students need to understand before coming to the US. So part 1 is the 2 things that you need to understand before we start with actually how the US degrees are structured. So the first thing is it's structured in credits, not years. Now we've talked about this a lot on the channel already. You need to understand that in order to graduate, you just need to fulfill the requirements. You don't need to stay at college for a certain number of years. Now a few things to note on this is that a degree is usually 120 to 128 credits long. So that's the requirements that you have to fulfill. Instead of say the UK or Europe, you'd have to do 3 years. It's actually you have to do 120 to 128 credits. And one class is equal to 3 credits. Now this is approximately, some classes are equal to 1 credit or 2 credits, and some are even equal to 4 or 5. But most classes, 90% of classes I would say, are equal to 3 credits. And you take between 12 and 18 credits roughly per semester. That's the kind of range that your school will give you. So you can either take 12 or you can take 18 for the same price. You can't go under 12 or else you won't be eligible anymore. And you can't go over 18 or else it will cost you more tuition fees. But between 12 and 18 credits is the same price, so you could do 15, 16, 13, 14 if you wanted to, and you could do 12 or 18. You just can't go over or under those numbers. That's approximately between 4 and 6 classes per semester. And obviously a US college, it's 2 semesters, so you do a term from September to December, you have 4 weeks off for Christmas, and then you have January till early May, late April time. So it's 2 16-week semesters. Now another thing to note here is with these 120 to 128 credits, it's not just about the number of credits you get, but it's about how these credits are applied as well, which we will talk about later on in the video. But it's not just about accumulating as many credits as possible, and once you have 120 credits, then you can graduate. It doesn't work like that quite. And then the second thing, which is a very important thing to note, is most of your classes aren't your actual subject. So you have your electives, your major requirements, and your gen eds. It's about split into thirds. I'm going to use my degree as an example in part 2, which we're going to move on to next. Just know that, different to the UK, where all of your classes would have something to do with your major, in America it doesn't work like that at all. So just understand that. Okay, so here in part 2 we're going to talk about the specifics to how the US degree is structured and how the 3 parts are broken down and how these 120 to 128 credit, like I said, are applied and how you actually fulfill the graduation requirements to graduate school in US college. So I'm just going to briefly explain what each of these 3 parts are, just for a bit of context. Your major is what goes on your diploma, and it's got a fixed sequence of requirements that you have to fulfill. For example, you'd major in biology, you'd major in finance, or you'd major in accounting or business or something along those lines. Electives are like empty or filler credits, that they're just basically like free choice classes. They don't have to have anything to do with the rest of your degree. You can do whatever you like. They're just credit that fills you up to the graduation requirement. So gen eds stand for general education. They're basically a set of requirements set by each school that include subjects like maths and English, religious classes and things like that. And most schools separate them into categories that have something to do with their philosophy or their beliefs of their school. So for example, if you had a religious school, they would have a religious category where there's 9 or 10 credits that you have to fulfill in that category. For example, pursuing knowledge might be the name of a category, and that would include things like American government or English or maths. And then you could have an expressing self category where you have to do speech classes and English classes. So it's kind of random, and each school sets their own requirements. So it's just something that you have to get used to in the US system, and something that you have to accept is a school-based thing and you can't really predict. So I've created a little pie chart visual here, allow you to actually see how the credits are applied and how the degree is structured. So as I said, there are 3 parts: your electives, your major requirements, and your gen ed requirements. So first we're going to go with gen ed, and that's around 50 credits, which comes down to like 16 or 17 classes that you have to do throughout your degree. This will vary by school, but it's usually approximately 50 credits worth of your 120. So next is your actual major requirement. So the amount of credits you have to do here is actually dependent on the subject that you choose and the major that you choose. So if you were to do a more demanding major like nursing or medicine, then you'd have more major requirements, but a less demanding one like business, maybe you'd have something on the lower spectrum of these major requirements. And this is where it gets a little more complicated, because if your major requirements add up to 60, well then you'll only have to do 10 electives in order to get to the 120 credits. So electives, which is the last point, is just filler credit. So once you've fulfilled the gen ed and the major requirements for what you've chosen, then electives will just be the amount of credits you need up to that point of graduation. So let's use an example of 128 credits needed to graduate, and your gen eds are 50 credits and your major is 50 credits. So in this case, you would need to fulfill all your gen ed requirements, fulfill all your major requirements, then you'd be left on 100 credits, and then you'd have to do 20 of electives, and then you'd be able to graduate. Now, just to reiterate, these electives, they can be absolutely anything. They don't have to have anything to do with your major or your subject, although a lot of people do them to do with their major because that's obviously what they enjoy. Now, another thing to mention here that confuses a lot of people is minors. Now, everybody, when they talk about the US system as an international student, they go, yeah, the system is like majors and minors, but they don't really know what that means. Minors are an optional part of a US degree, and they're actually not very optimal for accelerating graduation. So from that point of view, I wouldn't really recommend doing a minor unless you're extremely interested in it. Minors are usually 15 to 21 credits. What a lot of people do is use their elective credits to go towards a minor. People do these because it looks a little bit more prestigious on their graduation sheet, because they would have done a major and a minor, so they'd have worked harder at school and they'd have more of a specialization in certain subjects, and it would look better on your CV. But really, I don't think anybody actually cares that much about a minor. It's more just about pursuing an interest and then getting some sort of credit for it. So let's assume that a minor is 20 credits long. So let's use the old example of the 120 credits and 50-50 here. If you were to fulfill all of your gen ed requirements and major requirements, both at 50 credits, you'd have 20 credits left. And say a minor is 21 credits, you can fulfill your elective credit doing a minor, so you could get a little bit of extra prestige on your degree, which is actually what a lot of people do. But because I got transfer credit from the UK, I actually didn't get the opportunity to do this, so I got empty electives and that's how I fulfilled them. But most of the time, I actually wouldn't recommend doing a minor. I think it's a little bit pointless, but each to their own. People like to pursue interests, and not everything is about optimization, so that's what minors are. So I hope that makes sense. As you can see, it's structured very differently. Okay, so I hope that made sense. I know it's a little bit complicated, but it's just something you've got to get your head around. But the next part we're going to talk about is part 3, which is class levels. Classes are separated into 100, 200, 300, and 400 levels, and these represent the years that you're supposed to study them. So 100 classes would represent year 1, 200 classes would represent year 2, etc. And the individual classes are given codes. So for example, MTH 135 would be a maths 100 level class. So that would be a maths class that you take in your first year. Now, a thing to note here is that you don't have to take 100 level classes in your first year. That's just the level that it is. 100 classes are going to be the easiest, and 400 level classes are going to be the hardest. The 100 and 200 level classes are intro classes. So it would be introductory psychology or introductory mathematics or something along those lines. And they're usually quite easy to pass, and people often don't really struggle with them. These are actually really important because you can test out of these a lot of the time using CLEP and DSST, and this can really help accelerate your graduation timeline. So I would actually recommend people to test out of these classes using things like CLEP and DSST because they're very straightforward and you don't have to sit through an entire semester that way. You can just do it in a couple of days and then it's done. And obviously, as we've talked about in other videos, it's free to do this. So also, a lot of gen eds are 100 and 200 level classes. They're very straightforward. They're not meant to challenge you that much. They're just meant to teach you things. So that's 100 and 200 level classes. Now we have 300 and 400 level classes, which are kind of third and fourth year classes. They're the more challenging ones, and they're usually to do with your major, so you'll specialize more in your third and fourth year traditionally. Now, a lot of the reason you do these in your third and fourth year is because they've got prerequisites. A lot of the 300 and 400 level classes require you to do 100 and 200 level classes before you can actually register for them. Because, for example, a maths class, if you haven't done the MTH 135 or 235, then you won't be capable of doing the 300 or 400 level maths classes. These 300 and 400 classes are very hard to test out of, so you can't really use things like CLEP. So you usually have to sit them at the school. So because of this, these are the classes that actually control your timeline a lot of the time. If you're able to get your 100 and 200 level classes done in 1 year instead of 2, then you can do your 300 and 400 level classes in year 2 and 3 and you're able to graduate 1 year early. So really it's important to have this information early on so you can really take advantage of these easy classes, and this is actually where you can save the most time and money. But the first step to saving time and money is actually understanding the difference between the two levels of classes. So then you can plan your degree around this and you can actually understand where you can save money and where you can save time. So part 4 and the final thing we're going to talk about is transfer credits. Now, the first thing you have to understand in this point is that transferring universities is very normal in America. Now, again, we've talked about this on the channel before, but it's something that international students struggle to get their head around. A lot of students transfer schools at least once in their college career. When you transfer schools, you have to transfer the credit from your current school to your new school. Sometimes these credits can transfer badly based on the classes that you've taken at your old school. It's actually a major point in choosing your classes effectively if you plan to transfer, or even if you don't plan to transfer at the moment, you might plan to transfer in the future, so it's something to always keep in mind. Now, in future, I'm going to make more videos about how to choose your classes effectively for transferring, but for now, just understand that it matters which classes you take, and some credits don't actually transfer schools. Now, an important thing to note here is that all credits actually transfer. So when I say some credits don't transfer, I mean that some credits don't transfer and apply to major requirements or gen ed requirements. So if you take 50 credits at a school and they were all gen ed requirements, then you fulfilled 50 requirements at your old school. But say that your new school now doesn't take any of these as gen ed fulfillments, they will just take these credits as open electives, and these won't help you towards graduating at all. Because with this example, you'll have 30 open elective credits that won't take you any closer to graduating. So to put that simply, all credits will transfer to at least open elective, but it's just about fighting to get those credits fulfilled to their degree. So that is the point of fighting for fulfillment of your credits. This is actually a funny thing because you can actually fight for fulfillment. So if they don't initially accept your credit, you can provide syllabuses or say, I think this should apply to here, and they can evaluate it and have a look. So you need to ask questions because they might not initially give you what you deserve. And it's all about course equivalency, which is basically how a course that you did at your old school, how equivalent that is to the course at your new school. And you can also do things like if you have an introductory psychology class that you've done at your old school and they have a expressing self part of your gen ed, you could maybe fight for the introductory psychology to be part of the expressing self because you feel like you've expressed yourself doing psychology when they might not have it directly in their requirements. So the biggest thing to understand here is that the US system is actually very flexible, but nobody explains the rules properly. And people who understand these things like transfer credits and rules and requirements, they always end up saving the most time and money. But most students just end up taking the default path and spending unnecessary time in the system. The US system rewards students who understand how the structure actually works. This is my explanation in 4 parts to how the US system works. I hope that the US college system makes a bit more sense to you now. So if you're planning on studying in America, already at US college, or just want to understand a bit more about how the system actually works, then make sure to subscribe and stay tuned with the channel because I'm going to be posting many more videos just like this in the future, explaining everything that I wish I knew before starting my US degree. And if you want to learn exactly how I planned my degree, saved money, and structured everything in the US system, then I've put together a full resource called the US College Guide, where I break down everything into much more detail and tell you exactly how I got into the position that I'm in now. You can check out the US College Guide in the description below. Thank you very much for watching the US College Guide, and I'll see you in the next one.